dear ones. You're listening to the What God Is Not podcast with Father Michael O'Loughlin and Mother Natalia.
Hello, listeners. Father Michael. Today is Mother Natalia's episode, and she is here with her bestie, Mother Gabriella. And Mother Gabriella is talking about continuing the I don't know what we call this series on the various nuns of Christ the Bridegroom coming and sharing some of their passions with us in a good way. She's talking about leisure. Sorry, there are bad passions too. She's sharing leisure, how that's oriented to worship, how that's restorative. It brings peace, orients us to Christ, and she at the end offers us some practical ways of engaging with that reality. And then they reveal their awkward but beautiful friendship with each other. So if you are a #banter hater, please skip ahead to about 9:02.
Christ is risen.
Indeed, he is risen.
You can say it too.
Christ is risen.
But that's great. Welcome, Mother Gabriella.
Thanks.
Glad we're setting out on an awkward note.
I just want to hear the nervous breathing out. That's what I want to hear. So our listenership can hear. Can you do that, Mother?
That's what happened right before we prayed.
I forget that people get nervous for this.
I know. I tend to forget that now too, because I'm not as nervous as probably I should be anymore.
Exactly.
I think I probably did a better job in the beginning because I was nervous. And anyways, that's the life. Also, during the prayer, I literally got my fingers stuck in the handle of my monkey mug. It was very scary. It reminded me of a time when I was a kid, and my leg got caught in one of the folding chairs in like an auditorium or something. Like I was sitting on my legs as I always did, and when it slipped. Like between where do you know what I'm talking about? How the chairs fold up and
Are you like sitting backwards or something like that?
No, she's sitting like on her
my
knee.
leg slipped, and my leg was behind me and got caught in when it folded up.
Okay.
Did you bash your face on them?
No, I just was like stuck there, and someone had come home, and I don't remember much. It's blocked out because it was a trauma. Someone was referring to that recently though. My parents were talking about it. I don't remember why.
Does that count as claustrophobia? Because like if I have a ring that won't come off, like I start freaking out. Like
you don't even wear
oh my gosh,
rings.
it's stuck.
Is that why?
I do. I'm trying to think of a clever response. When I go out and all the ladies are going after me, sometimes it's easier to wear a ring just to keep them off with the collar around them.
Barf.
Sorry.
That happened to be one time, except not getting stuck in an auditorium. But do you ever...
I definitely thought you meant all the ladies were coming after you.
No, I was bringing it back from the awkward situation that was over there.
Appreciate you, bro.
Thank you.
No, there was one time... Do you ever have it where you're like riding your bike and your shoelaces get caught on the pedal?
No, but that's terrifying.
It was terrifying. I was riding on my street. My shoelaces got wrapped around the pedal. I like fell over on the side. There's a car coming at me, and I was like, ah! But I was able to get up in time, but it was very scary.
Oh, that's terrifying. That was the situation. I've already talked about this on the podcast before, but that was the situation where I was riding my bike up the hill on what's that road? Nash. And there was one of those so annoying, those little yippy dogs that come after us when we run. And they haven't done that recently.
It did it to me the other day.
Oh, okay.
I almost stopped and said something to them and be like, "Excuse me, I'm gonna kick your dog."
Anyways, this dog almost made me. It was like yipping at my ankles while I was on the bike going uphill, and a car was passing, and I was like, there was all sorts of horrible things happening. Anyways. So
you're about to say something that was going to turn off 75% of our listeners that love animals.
I know. I just stopped.
Prudence gained.
Prudence gained. So welcome, Mother Gabriella.
Thank you.
We're continuing our Meet the Nuns series. I don't know that any of the other nuns are actually going to come on besides the three of you. So this might even be the final of the series. And by final of the series, I mean the start of the final of the series, because Mother Gabriella plans to do like...
It's a 25-part series on whatever it is I feel like.
Yeah.
Just trying to beat Father Michael in his 24-part series on the Divine Liturgy.
So I think I know what this is about because I listened to the prayer.
We'll have you guess, but here's an honesty moment, as if I'm ever not honest. Here's an honesty moment.
You forgot what her topic was.
No, the reason I kept hesitating in prayer and like having to think a long time is because I was trying to think of how to pray that wouldn't give it away. Which is probably not what I should be doing in prayer. But, I'll let you guess the topic. But first, I want to.
I'm gonna let you finish.
I almost did that, but I already made that joke on here many times, and so I'm glad that you did it instead. But first, I just wanted to share something that will give listeners kind of an insight into my relationship with Mother Gabriella, and then we can get into the actual topic. So, because.
I think I remember.
You do. So, because Mother Gabriella and I are very close, and we're very similar. Like, she's one of the ones that I would have been friends with in the world. And like part of the blessing of being at the monastery, I think I've talked about this before, is you become close with people that you otherwise would not have gotten to know. And it's a huge blessing because, like, Mother Petra, for example, she and I, just totally different circles, totally different temperaments. Like, we would have probably never become friends in the world just because it just wouldn't have naturally happened. And yet she and I have gotten to know each other here, and we're very close. We've realized we have a lot in common and all of that. But Mother Gabriella is one of the ones that even in the world, like, we just would have for sure been friends. And we're both just really weird is part of it. Like, people come and they see us interact and they're just like, y'all are weird. And Hannah gets us. I think, shout out to Hannah, one of my spiritual daughters. Yeah. She gets us. But we share, she's the one I've talked about before, Mother Gabriella, that we share a bathroom in between our cells. And so that's where we brew our coffee in the morning, in the percolator. We make our coffee in the morning, and we have a whole sticky note system so that we know who's had the coffee, anyways. And we've just like gotten really used to each other and spent a lot of time together. And so we were on a monastery. It was supposed to be kind of retreat, but it turned into more like vacation, which was actually kind of what we needed at the time. Mm-hmm. This is very appropriate for our topic today.
It is,
actually. So anyways,
this will help you, Father Michael.
Yes. So we're on this retreat / vacation. We did have some conferences and a lot of silent time and stuff, but we also had time to just be together and play games and whatever. And so at one point during free time, Mother Gabriella and I are just playing a game of rummy and sipping on, I don't even remember what we were drinking, but like sipping on our coffee or whatever and playing rummy. And then we each had like a little bowl of snacks that we were eating. And then months later, Mother Gabriella's like, you know that time that we were playing rummy and eating snacks and sipping on our drinks together? And I was like, yeah, I know. And she's like, I think I've never felt more like a married couple before. and it was like we're
just total silence.
Old married couple. Yep. And so that's my relationship with Mother Gabriella. We're like an old married couple. And
old weird
married couple. That's true.
We're like the ones who have those weird inside jokes.
Oh, yes.
That nobody can understand, and it's inappropriate to even share them most of the time.
We have to be very careful. I should have warned you of that. We have to be very careful of that in this recording because it's sometimes really tempting to make an inside joke and then nobody understands it. And so then it's just dumb. But yeah, we also have to be careful. I've had a listener get upset, not really upset, but they were like, don't do that. When Father Michael and one of us will say something and then we'll be like, oh, I can't, I'll share that with you after. And it's like, that's probably not nice. So we shouldn't do that. That's the whole story. Okay. 9 minutes and 2 seconds. Father Michael, what do you think is the topic for today?
You said something about edit vacation.
What?
Edit vacation?
Edit vacation?
Yeah. You do the prayer, you said something, and then you just mentioned about vacation, going on vacation.
I said something about edifying. Is that what you heard?
Oh, edification.
Were you just making a joke?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, I have no idea what it's about. No idea.
Oh.
It's about weird nicknames like calling each other bra and bae, and because you already called her bra once during this recording.
It was bra. No, anyway, okay. So
People miss. It's a nuance. People miss the
BRUH. Bra.
BRUH. Hashtag bra.
bruh.
That's going to be one of our hashtags, if I remember. Anyways, Mother Gabriella, what is our topic actually? Because it's not about edit vacation.
Our topic is about leisure.
Dun, dun, dun. Why aren't you even responding?
Sorry.
Are you even
Sorry.
listening?
Back here?
I'm planning our next recording, and I apologize.
Well, let's finish this one.
I'm
okay?
sorry, I'm being distracted.
Chandia? Okay, come back.
So
yes.
leisure.
He's trying to think of another joke.
Mother, don't call me out on these things. Just let me have my moment. She's like giving commentary, and the priest decided to think of another joke.
All right. So we're talking about leisure and what leisure is not. Because I asked Mother Gabriella to take this topic. Well, I'm letting the nuns talk about whatever they want, but I told her that I thought this was one that she would do a very good job of, because it's a conversation she and I have had lots of times, and it's also there's a lot here that Mother Gabriella and I have tried to sort of start living out, and I think that's been really fruitful. So we wanted to share that with others as well. So why has this topic been of interest to you, Mother Gabriella, and what made you want to talk about this?
It's so great that you asked that question because it corresponds with the beginning of my notes.
I actually saw your note there. That's why I said it.
You're following my outline thinking.
Father Robert Pipta would approve.
Yeah, so originally I was drawn to the whole topic of leisure because I would end up with free time. Because in the monastery, I don't know if you talked about poverty of time, probably all the time you've talked about that, but like we don't have a lot of time. And in fact, we give up everything, including our time. And so when I finally get an opportunity for some kind of free time that's, time that I can use however I want, I would end up just like staring off into space or just like
Scrolling on Facebook.
Yes, yeah. When I had Facebook, scrolling on Facebook, or like just watching YouTube videos for hours, like of absolutely nothing. And it was like, how am I spending my time? Like, and I realized I had no concept of how to engage that like free time. And so I had heard a couple years ago about a book called Leisure, the Basis of Culture by Josef Pieper. And it had been like a thought, like I should read that sometime. And then a friend of mine happened to have an extra copy, and we were reading it together. And I started to look into, a little bit more like what this whole idea of leisure is, because in my mind, leisure was how I use my free time, which the irony is in reading Leisure, the Basis of Culture, that's like exactly what it's not. Like I love, this is one quote he says in the midst of the of the document. He says, leisure, it must be clearly understood, is a mental and spiritual attitude. It's not simply the result of external factors. It is not the inevitable result of spare time, a holiday, a weekend, or a vacation. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm approaching this the wrong way. And so when I started to realize, like, okay, well, first of all, I have no idea what leisure is. And second of all, I have no idea how to engage this. And so I'm glad I'm reading this book because I can learn a little bit better. And so I realized, and I can talk more about, like, different things that I kind of learned from this. I realized that my understanding of, like, culture and leisure was really very formed by our 21st century idea of, like, what to do when you have time to yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of it has to do with, like, entertainment. So, like, the entertainment industry, movies, sports, all these kind of things. But I realized without this understanding, I had touched this reality without understanding what I was touching. And so it was kind of putting words to that. And it reminded me of this experience I had a couple of years ago. I was able to go to a Cavs finals game when they won the NBA championship. And I went, a couple friends of mine, had purchased an extra ticket, and they took me to dinner, and we went, and this was, like, the highlight of forever. It's like, I haven't been to a Cavs game in forever since I entered the monastery, but then also I was like, oh my gosh, it's a finals game. Like, this is something I would have never expected. And so as I was there, it ends up, and it's like every seat's packed. The energy is contagious. Like, it's just like, there's so much frenetic energy in the room, and it was amazing. And, but it happens to be the one that we lost. And so it was like, you experience, like, the height of all that frenetic energy, and then just, like, the black hole of just utter despair as everyone leaves the stadium in silence. And I realized, I was like, wow.
I understand this as a Raiders fan.
Yes. And also, Browns fan. Yeah, it's just horrible. This is a typical Cleveland experience. But so as we're leaving, I just had this realization. I was like, lots of people are leaving the stadium and they're not okay. And I was like, but I'm leaving this and I'm okay. Like, I mean, I'm sad. Like, I want them to win. Like, I want Cleveland to finally win a championship because we can't ever seem to do that. But, like, existentially, I'm okay. But I realize a lot of people here, if this doesn't happen, will not be okay. And today are not okay. And it was just like, if you don't have a place to worship, you're going to worship wherever the culture tells you to worship. And so that was just such a tangible experience for me of this reality of, like, the link between culture and leisure and worship, and how, and he talks about at the beginning of Leisure, the Basis of Culture, he says, culture depends for its very existence on leisure, and leisure in turn is not possible unless it has a durable and consequently living link with the cultus, with divine worship. And so, like, when our culture is divided from an act of worship, it doesn't make sense. There's a hole that happens, and then we start to worship anything because we as human beings want to worship something. We want to offer that act of worship somewhere.
We're trying to fill that hole.
Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of a context of, like, how I came to this. And an example of that in my life of how I'm starting to understand the difference between leisure and what we would call, like, the entertainment industry, and even, like, what's the connection there with how we use our free time and all that. So,
yeah, and it's interesting too, because I'm sure we're going to get to this, but it's already making me think of part of what makes something leisure has got to be whether or not it's fulfilling, right? And this experience that you're talking about, like, you always spoke very fondly of that evening because you had this nice dinner with your friends, and you enjoyed being at the game even though there was loss. And whereas the people who are going away totally unfulfilled, who feel like actually the hole has just widened as opposed to being filled at all, I just think that's got to be an aspect of what leisure is. Like, it's not unfulfilling leisure.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's it's because the reason it's not unfulfilling is because it's connected to that worship.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's kind of like the spoiler from the end of it is like leisure is actually impossible if it's not found in the context of worship.
Mm-hmm.
The end. We don't have to talk about it anymore. No, I'm just kidding.
Now, I'm wondering.
Ever.
It is interesting because, like, once you guys have a party of time, I think so does anybody who's trying to run a business or a church or something and doesn't have like hours clock in and clock out time. So it's kind of always on your mind. And I think part of that is that we assume I've for a long time assumed that leisure time is downtime, and that's just what you do when you're exhausted. Mm-hmm. And so it has everything to do with exhaustion and trying to get rest in rather than actually building up a culture. Because I mean, I saw that in Alaska. You know, they what they talked about was fly fishing all the time. It's like people that talk about sports. All the cigar bar down the street. It is sports all the time. At least the one in Denver was sports and politics and sometimes culture. But this is like sports all the time. And whatever's on TV, they're talking about, they know about all of it. And I engage as best I can. But that kind of points to what you said about worship. I think in Alaska, to overgeneralize, it was fly fishing. I said, what do you guys talk about in like the off season? They're like, tying flies. Like, okay, you tie flies in the off season to go fly fishing in the on season. You know, but I think that is also it, because it is. It's in a sense what forms us, because doesn't worship ideally forms us. So worship is meant to form us, so we undergo theosis and form us into Christ. Mm-hmm. And so when we do anything, again, I want to hear more from Pieper, but when we do anything that orients us towards worship, I remember like in that movie. Into Great Silence, like the very few parts of the movie where they actually talk. I remember them talking and discussing like the holy water fonts or this type of chant. Like it was like their discussion in their very few times that they actually talked was about worship, the actual worship. Like it was about when we're in church praying, when we're in church worshiping. What does that look like? But I do. It does seem to say what leisure is what actually forms us in the higher things, because work forms us. Of course, even menial labor forms us. It makes us better at doing that menial labor. But leisure should form us beyond just being good at whatever we're doing in leisure. Leisure, I imagine, like art, which is often part of leisure, would be to direct us to something else. Would be to form us to something higher, not just to be able to do something well. I watch those videos, and I used to love them, of like people doing one job extremely well, like flinging fish at the fish market, or you see them, putting the same glop of something into the same little cups, and they're so quick with it and they're perfect with it. And it's like, first like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. It's like, it's really not. Because that's what they do 8 hours a day, every single day. That's why they're so good at it. Their body and their mind has been formed to be able to do this one thing well. In my mind, leisure is actually transcendent. It teaches you how to do everything well. It's not just this one thing, but it teaches you how to, in the context of worship, how to have the freedom to pursue truth and beauty and goodness and all these things, because it is tied into that worship, and therefore into something transcendent, therefore into something that is actually formative and moving us into what is Christ. So that may be a question. If I'm doing leisure, am I just doing something that makes me good at this one thing, or does it make me kind of good at being a better human?
Yeah, that reminds me of this quote. Mother Gabriella and I share a love for Evagrius. We both just, oh man, he's great. Anyways, he has this quote in his writing on asceticism and stillness. He says, "Be like an astute businessman. Make stillness your criterion for testing the value of everything, and choose always what contributes to it." Like, if this thing is not contributing to stillness, in other words, if this thing is not contributing to our interior life, then we should not choose it. And he says everything, not just work, not just prayer, but even our leisure, like what we choose to do in our leisure time.
And I think to add nuance to that, to generalize it, like my thought is that, well, that means if something gives me anxiety, just don't do it. But there are things that like I'm responsible for that I need to do. And so the end goal is there. If I put the effort into it, then I will be able to have stillness while doing it. In other words, if I get better at something, put the work into doing something I don't want to do so that I can put it into a place where I can do it better, then all of a sudden now I have stillness in an area where I used to have anxiety.
Yeah. So it contributes to stillness in the sense of it's allowing you the opportunity to overcome your anxiety to do this thing you need to do. And that's a contribution to stillness. Yeah.
I think, though, to go back, Father Michael, to what you were saying, too, you were articulating exactly that question of what, is it so I can be good at one thing or so that I can be good at being human, basically? And I think that's precisely the point, that the problem is that we live in a world that the context is that of work, but work, and so our leisure is actually seen as like rest from work so that we can go back and work better. And so kind of like that difference that like, so I can be good at this one thing. Well, that's not understanding leisure at all. It's only understanding, it's like a socialized view of the world, right? Like everything is about work because that's been substituted for worship of God. And so, and it's interesting, there's also like leisure, because it's a spiritual attitude, to what you were saying, Mother Natalia, like implies this inner stillness and calm, and silence so that we can receive what's within us and what's around us. It's meant to be restorative, but not so I can simply go back and do more work, but because it in and of itself is a good. And so if I keep using leisure in order to be better at work, then I'll never actually enjoy the fruits of leisure. And the way where we see that most is like how God created us. Like he took a day to rest in himself and not in his works. And so that's part of our need. The worship and the rest of Sabbath, of the day of that we set aside for rest and worship, is to be like God, which means not to rest in the work that I do, but to rest in him, to rest in and of myself and in him. And so thus becoming human. And it's interesting to go back, and at the beginning of the paper, he talks about like the original concept of leisure. It's actually coming from a word that means school, which I thought this was like utterly fascinating to me, because school never meant anything but work. From my concept, like it was like plug and chug. Everything was like, I'm going to study for a test and then I'm going to get a good grade, and then that's what it is. But like the concept of school in Greek, or in the ancient world, was that of leisure, and that's where that came from. And they had this understanding of our understanding. That there's like two parts of our mind. There's like the rational part, the ratio, and then the intellectus. And the rational part is the purely human part, that's like discursive, that's like seeking understanding. And then there's the intellectus, which is this understanding part that receives. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding once you get into the later philosophies of like Kant and those kind of people, which I'm not schooled in all of that, but I learned a little bit by reading this.
Did you give your disclaimer that you wanted to give?
I didn't give the disclaimer is that I have a degree in accounting. Yeah. And so anything I say can't be used against me. These are my musings. But this differences of like, the intellectus is like the superhuman way of understanding or receiving as gift that which is around me versus this discursive, like working things out. And so what our culture is all about these days is about this like discursive, like earning things, right? Like I'm always taking things in so I can learn more. But what that does is it doesn't value the fact that I'm actually created with a faculty to receive. And so when everything is earned, when everything needs to be earned, then nothing is gift. And then that informs everything about our life. So it even informs and especially infects the way that we receive love, because we think I have to keep doing more so that I can earn more so that I can be loved, not because I need to receive something as gift. And
we've talked about this many times before. Of just this is part of why there's this horribly pervasive mindset in our spirituality of like we need to even earn God's love, and that if we're not doing, if we're not producing, if we're not, this even like when it comes to repenting for our sin, it's we have so much scrupulosity because like going to confession, we have this misconception that like that's not what forgives us, how we're forgiven of our sins. Like we need to do the things in order to be forgiven. And I think that's one of the places we see this in the spiritual life.
Rather than going to confession to participate in the forgiveness that's already poured out that we've turned away from. It's not about earning, it's about receiving.
Yeah.
And so it's what's beautiful is that we as monastics get to live this in a really like intentional way. We basically step outside the world and outside this utilitarian way as much as we can because we're still infected by the culture. But we're in a process of trying to live a life that says like, I'm going to live outside of this utilitarian model of being. Like I love, he says this, there's a line, there's two quotes that I wanted to read about that. He talks about, because when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is monastic life. The first part was, there's no need to waste words showing that not everything is useless, which cannot be brought under the definition of the useful. And I was like, oh, that's my life.
Can you read that one more time?
There is no need to waste words showing that not everything is useless, which cannot be brought under the definition of the useful. And then he goes on to, he finishes the section by saying, it is necessary for the perfection of human society, Aquinas writes, that there should be men who devote their lives to contemplation, necessary not only for the good of the individual who so devotes himself, but for the good of human society. And so he's pointing out, like, we need people who step aside from the utilitarian, who model for the world what it looks like to say, like, I'm not going to base my life on what the culture says. Like, I'm willing to be useless. I'm willing to be useless for the Lord, basically. And because you hear that like terrible sayings like "sister, what a waste," or "father, what a waste." Like you could have done so much for the world. When it's like not looking at offering our life connected with Jesus' sacrifice on the cross in this daily toil of worship and praise of God is the greatest thing we could ever give.
And that's actually, I'm really glad you said that, because it reminds me of what you were saying at the very beginning of how this misconception of leisure is a result of, and in fact, this impossibility of leisure is a result of a lack of worship, a lack of having someone that we worship. Because when I experienced this the most, when I was entering the monastery, and I had the most comments from coworkers who would say that, like, I'm wasting my life and things like that, because I'm entering a monastery and because I'm not working and because they knew I would be celibate. Those same coworkers were the ones that, if I had said I'm choosing to not have children because I want to focus on my career, they'd be like, well, good for you. And they, and they'd be so supportive of that. And it's like, so I can't choose to not have biological children because I think that this is how I can worship God. But I can do it if it's how I think that I can worship myself and my career and glory. And, and it's just like, that's so fascinating to me.
you're saying that it's not a 1-for-1, but it reminds me of my experience when I first entered, and like
a great story.
Feeling this like rub so particularly. I was sick. I went to urgent care because I hadn't switched doctors to up around the monastery, and so I'm at urgent care and I have to fill out the form, about yourself. And one of the things is like employer, and I had to put unemployed, and I was really uncomfortable, like physically, like getting really like just this was gnawing at me. And so, and then the woman's like reading the form back to me.
She's just verifying.
Like she's literally just verifying, right? But like, and so she's like, so you're unemployed? And I was like, yes. And then it just tumbles out of my mouth, but I contribute to society. and like the whole, waiting room just like rubbernecks and looks at me as I'm sitting there like so embarrassed. But it was like such a poignant comment of and social commentary of like how I felt about like, oh, I don't even get a paycheck anymore. How do I prove what I'm worth? Like, how do I prove that I do something that affects the world? And it's like, whoa, like so far from the truth of what's happening, right? And the truth of our life. But like, that's, so it's like, I get this because I've lived it and I'm being purified of it.
C.S. Lewis talks about how this is in Screwtape Letters, if I remember correctly. I think it's letter 13. I just preached on this recently.
How did you
I know. I think I did it for a homily or for a lecture reflection or something. Anyway, I think it's letter 13. I could be wrong, but it's the subject. So most of you know this, but Screwtape Letters is a satire. It's written by C.S. Lewis from one uncle devil to his nephew devil, who's like a guardian devil over a subject, and the subject and the uncle's giving the nephew advice on how to corrupt the subject,
and it is like uncanny.
I'm sorry?
It's uncanny.
Yes.
Like, this is absolutely how the devil works. This is,
exactly.
I read it and I'm like, how does C.S. Lewis know what the devil does in my life?
It's an amazing, amazing work. And every letter is short and it's so easy to read. It's good. But I think in this letter, the subject starts to slip away. And so all you see is the letters from the uncle to the nephew. So you don't see what the story, but he does a really good job of kind of like, you can tell by the uncle's letter what the nephew's letter was. But he says, you're letting him slip away. And he says, your biggest fault was letting him take that walk and letting him read that book. He said, literally, like you had him in your clutches. He was so close to losing his soul, but you let him read a book for no other reason than enjoyment. You let him take a walk for no other reason than he was going to enjoy it. He wasn't reading the book to impress his friends with what he's read. It reminded me of this, supposedly like in the 40s and 50s, they literally would give seminarians these big, thick books that had like a 2-page summary of every single piece of literature. And so you'd read, it was like Cliff Notes or Spark Notes, but it was only 2 pages, so that if you were in polite company and you had never read Jane Austen or Jane Eyre or Dostoevsky, you would have a 2-page summary so that you would know enough to kind of hold your own conversation. Like that's horrible. I mean, I get it, but it's horrible because it's like you're cheating and you're saying the only reason I need to know these things is to impress people or to be impressive or to make the church look good or whatever it is, rather than any sort of actually engagement with beautiful art or a beautiful text. But that's what he says. In other words, what made him look back to God was doing something out of true leisure, something that was not oriented toward another purpose, but merely because taking a walk is good and reading a book is good, and it's forming him, making him a better man. It's a relaxing experience, and it's something that's going to actually bring him true joy based upon the way that God created him, the way that God created the world. And it's this brilliant realization that, I mean, it really kind of struck me. When is the last time I did that? When is the last time I did something merely because like you said, Mother Gabriella, like with social media now, just scrolling has become because it's so stimulating, because there's a new a new story or a new joke or a new, visual. Every single thing you go through, we've turned our free time into that instead of leisure. Mm-hmm. And if we literally could just read a book that we don't have to read, or take a walk when there's no other purpose other than just enjoying what's around, mm-hmm. even in LA, then it can be this experience that loosens the grip of the devil on our lives and actually mm-hmm. orients us towards the good and therefore God.
And instead of doing so both of those examples, like the going for a walk or the reading a book, they engage the mind and or the body in a way that we're not really doing in our society in our free time. We're using free time and jumping to one of two extremes for the most part. Like this is, I think, the most common use of free time. We're jumping to one of two extremes, both of which seem to just contribute to this concept of need to produce, need to work. One is that it's free time, but we choose to just continue on with work. Mm-hmm. And because we need to be producing right now, or we choose to do something that's completely vegging, mm-hmm. Of just Netflix binge, YouTube binge, and staring off into space, whatever it is, something because the reason that we give ourselves and others and whatever is we need this time to just veg in order to then be able to work, like you were saying earlier, Mother Gabriella. And so we jump to these two extremes, and both of them in some sense are just turning off the intellect, mm-hmm. right? So Absolutely. It's they're either, they're both in the, well, maybe they're not both in the ratio, but they're both just turning off the intellect mm-hmm. In order to produce.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of the priests that I was reading this book with and talking about. He was sharing that a spiritual director in college seminary had said very poignantly, there's no reason you need to check out. There's no reason you need to mentally check out. And that was kind of it was very convicting for him, but then also for me, just to sit there and say, okay, just like you're saying, why do I feel the need to check out? Because I don't want to feel, because I don't want to, and there's this constant temptation, which actually so one of the points Pieper makes is part of this restlessness we feel in society, is this achadia. So one of the 8 evil thoughts that Evagrius, our favorite, talks about, achadia, acedia, acedia, however you want to say it. But this inner restlessness, when it's related to culture and worship, it's a refusal to be who I am, a refusal to be as God created me to be. And so I want to be anywhere else, be anyone else,
be anytime else.
And so, and you see that in how people choose to veg out. So I can numb out. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to do these things. Versus or even, and then how we're tempted always, again, to work, to keep going or to check out. We're tempted to give up those things that will actually bring us back to a concrete sense of reality and a concrete experience of God, whether it's a walk, whether it's reading something. And that leisure is supposed to be, like Father Michael kind of said earlier, it's drawing us up into into eternity, mm-hmm. in being able to worship in each moment God, as I encounter things throughout the day. And I was thinking about this this recording on my Poustinia, and thinking Poustinia for us each month is really this experience of time that we set aside for prayer, but also just to reconnect with ourselves and with the Lord. And how much, I know I experienced this, and I'm sure you could probably speak to it too, how much that time gets attacked on the beforehand, mm-hmm. Oh, I just wish I didn't have to take this Poustinia. Mm-hmm. I have so much work I need to do. It's no, I need this forced time to transcend the world and reorder, because I'm not made for just work. I'm made for worship. And my work is meant to order me in order to worship. And so like that time every month that we have for quiet, and to set aside technology, set aside so much of the things that draw us out of the present moment. We come back to that during our monthly Pustinia. I don't know, that was just I was percolating that idea yesterday on my Pustinia, that I was like, that's what this is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is leisure. And even that leisure, I totally agree with you. But I've realized like things that I need to do on Pustinia or have on Pustinia or something in order to keep it as leisure, because I can slip into becoming spiritually slothful because I'm on Pustinia. And so it's just like I might kind of laze around and not let it be building of relationship, not let it be worship, but actually just waste my time, not in the sense of not working, but in the sense of like not even really using it as time for union or communion. But we have just like 5 or 10 minutes before we start wrapping up with prayer intentions and stuff. So can you just give Mother Gabriella, what are your thoughts, or any last thoughts that you have, but what are your thoughts on, I think we covered well what leisure is not, and we touched a little bit on what it is in the sense of like the walk or the book or something, but what's just like some practical tips you have for places that people can find leisure, or what they should use in kind of like tools for discernment of what to be doing with free time and things like that. Does that make sense?
Sure. The irony is that the actual text of Leisure, the Basis of Culture, he basically says like, yeah, I'm not giving you anything practical. This is just a bunch of beautiful things that you can, it's pointing out the problem without actually telling you. And so that's a good question. So what are some practical tips? I think,
like even just the experiences you and I have had of like when we've gone for a hike together on a personal day or something like that, like even those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think one thing, so a friend of mine, or I should say actually my high school youth group leader, she talked about, she did a lot with Al-Anon, but she's like, you need to retreat every day, every week, every month, and every year. And so like, what's my daily time of communion with the Lord? What's my weekly time of communion with the Lord? What's my monthly and what's my yearly? So like, you need to be taking a retreat all of those times. Like for us, that's at least our cell roll every day. Every week we have a Pustinia morning. Every month we have a Pustinia. Every year we take a yearly retreat. So translate that into your life. Like how are you having a cadence of moving in and out of time with the Lord? That's time that's only meant for Him. Because that's the first way, I think, to infect the rest of your life, for lack of a better term, with, or maybe impregnate the rest of your life with this sense of divine life and everything, is by taking that time for prayer will then spill over into everything else. And then as far as like maybe activities, I think, again, since it's a spiritual attitude, it's how am I engaging what I am doing? Like, is it simply for entertainment? Is it simply to numb out? Or am I watching a movie to then discuss and be in relationship with those I live with or with good friends or whatever to learn something more about life, about what God's doing in my life? Am I reading or listening? Am I reading to something or reading something or listening to something that's going to draw me into relationship with the Lord or only away from, like, and having that discernment. And so, is it bringing him in communion with other people and thus with the Lord or with the Lord directly, and to start to look at those things. So it's like, if it's only a temptation to go to a baseball game, to get angry as you drive in, to get angry at all the people there, to get angry on the way out, to overeat and all these things. Well, maybe that's not a good way to spend your free time or your time where like it's not moving you into communion and into an experience of God. But for some people, maybe it can. So it's like, I'm not putting that aside. I love sports. It's great. But it's like, am I going to this thing in order to worship it? Or am I going with Jesus to this in order to encounter him and how he wants to love me there. And that can take on many different forms. So it's kind of like, here's a rule of measure rather than this is what you should do.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's teaching the man to fish.
To fly fish.
Teaching the man to fly. Yeah, I like that aspect too about what you're saying of coming into communion with others in order to come into communion with the Lord, or just coming into communion with him directly. I was really consoled because Evagrius is like ascetic of ascetics, right? And he's like very austere and very strict. And in one of his, I don't know who he's writing to in this, but in one of his writings on prayer, he has 153 texts on prayer. At the beginning of it, in the prologue, he says, "When suffering from the fever of unclean passions, my intellect afflicted with shameful thoughts, I have often been restored to health by your letters." And so he's like writing to someone, and I was really consoled by like even Evagrius was restored by spiritual friendship. It's like this truth that it's not like our leisure, when we're saying that leisure needs to be like true leisure is actually worship. That doesn't even mean that we need to be hermits, we can be with other people, and that can restore us to spiritual health. That's the point of worship, is to be in perfect health, i.e. in union with the divine physician. Mm-hmm. And so if that's the point of worship, then that's the point of leisure. And leisure with friends can help to restore us to that. Health. If it's leisure, if we're with friends and we're actually like, this is what I'm talking about, edification. We've talked on the podcast before about we shouldn't just be surrounding ourselves with the people who we're going to gossip with, or who we're just going to be really negative with, or who, it's like we need to actually be in relationship that's for the upbuilding of the kingdom. Yeah.
I think that's an important thing, because gossip and whining and complaining, things like that, usually those are because there's an insecurity in the relationship, and I'm trying to build it up by putting other people down, or by showing someone that I know something they don't and I'm impressive to them, or I exaggerate or lie about stories to make myself look better. Like that means that we don't have the foundation of confidence in that relationship. And I think there needs to be, like, that's one of the things that like in C.S. Lewis, right? If you read a book for a reason other than impressing people, like other than impressing your friends. So to be able to live a life of leisure, you really need to have certain confidences in like a foundation, a groundwork of community that ideally comes from your family, right? I know I'm loved by God, and I know I'm loved by my family, and then I know I'm loved by my friends. And if I have these, what most of us don't have, all three of those areas, that knowledge. But if I do, then I can say, I don't need to earn anything. I can look with my friends in the community at God, rather than looking at each other, trying to establish this relationship. We've talked about it before about marriage, right? At some point, a couple is obsessed with each other because they're looking only at each other and analyzing their relationship. At some point, when it becomes healthy, they're now looking both on mission together. And that there's a confidence, a foundation in their relationship that now allows them to work together. The same thing is true for friendships in this way. And the same thing can be true, because I keep on thinking, I know a listener, and I'm asking this question, well, where do we? Isn't it okay to take naps? Isn't it okay to veg? Isn't it okay just to totally turn it off sometimes? And I think the one of the reasons why as I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons why I need to just turn it off sometimes and veg and take a nap is because I am exhausted. And that means I don't have the foundation of sleep, or I don't have the foundation of Sabbath rest. Like having good community is a foundation for confidence in leisure. Getting good sleep is a foundation. Taking the time to do these things. A lot of a life of leisure almost sometimes presupposes, or even moments of leisure presuppose impose a certain foundation of other virtues or other things in our life that have to be oriented so we don't need to veg. Because, I mean, beyond vegging, many people seek for an escape. And what like they need to escape this world, and that takes a form of things that are neutral, like video games or TV or movies or social media. It can also take the form of things that are objectively evil, like drugs and pornography and things like this. Like this escape from the world is because other foundations need to be set, and leisure can help with that. But I think that's the challenge for me and for anybody saying, well, are you telling me that I should never have just time when I shut my brain off? Are you telling me I should never have that time? No, but that your need to shut your brain off for escape or veg is probably other things contribute to that need, namely an unhealth in another way of your life. So again, work on true community and friendships. I had the best day off 2 days ago. Like I had 2 acquaintances I hung out with that were just deep conversations the whole time, and conversations I learned from, conversations that made me want to be a better man. And I was like, man, rarely have I had. And both of these were like secular LA friends. They weren't like my Catholic friends. Sorry, that's Georgia turning her light on and off. Like
that's the snake for those people who don't know. That's the
snake. So I like secular friends who I don't anticipate a very deep, virtuous conversation about philosophy and the deeper things and forgiveness and friendships and being honest and open with people and standing up for what you believe is true in the midst of great persecution. All of these things were conversations I had that day, and it was great. But I remember thinking, these conversations can only happen because there's a certain confidence in the friendship. We're not trying to really impress each other. And also, these are what allows us and allows me to not be grasping at friendships or be grasping at an escape or things like that, rather than receiving these things as gifts, as you said earlier, Mother Gabriella.
Yeah. And I guess I would challenge people to consider, even the times that you feel like you need to veg, I would challenge people to consider, are there other things that I could be doing, other ways that I can be resting that aren't necessarily vegging and turning my brain totally off, that would give me the same restoration that I feel I need. Like, I don't think it's vegging to take a nap. I think that can just be good and restorative. But it's like, could I be restored by going for a short walk, or for even like sitting outside and like watching the clouds or something, as opposed to a Netflix binge or something like that. So I would encourage people, like, yes, there are times that we need to rest, but I don't think that's the same as veg. So I would challenge people to consider other options, I guess.
And maybe before you engage in something like that, try to connect with the Lord and say, what am I actually seeking? Like, in trying to foster that internal discernment of, oh, I just want to do this. Okay, am I actually seeking you? Do I actually need you, but I'm taking this infinite need to a finite thing that's not gonna fill. Like, maybe actually what I need is some time in prayer, but what I want to do is binge watch CSI. Like, and so like just to take a pause before and enter into a moment of prayer, of worship, before you go back to whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or even like my next big like worldly thing that I want to get is a record player, because I literally want to like play records and do nothing else. Like, music has become background for me. It's either when I'm driving or when I'm working. It's always background. And with Spotify and things like that, it's so easy to have it on all the time in the background. I'm like, I want to be more intentional because music is beautiful and I love it. And I want to actually put on a record and then just sit there and do nothing else other than just focus on there's music playing right now. And I think a record player makes that easier. It's also better quality music. So like doing that, so like that's what I plan on being my veg time, you know, instead of trying to escape the world. Like I want to intentionally focus on one aspect of something that is beautiful and transcendent in a way, even though it's probably going to be Postal Service or Death Cab for Cutie or Dave Matthews Band or something like that. But it's like, it's just like sitting there, just like focusing on just that thing. And that can be good leisure time, like taking that walk or reading that book. But it doesn't have to be like intentional prayer. It doesn't have to be intentional intellectual stimulation. It can be just relaxation with something beautiful that is also transcendent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that part of the difference is what you're describing there is a way that you can experience connection with yourself and with God, versus some of the other kinds of like vegging are a disconnect. And I think that that's a significant difference. So yeah, because the one is exactly how Mother Gabriella was describing Acadia, of like wanting to be someone else or somewhere else or sometime else. It's a disconnect versus like actually fully experiencing the present moment.
I felt that yesterday. I had a really good day, a very, very busy day, but I was so looking forward, because Wednesday evenings we have Divine Liturgy, and I was so looking forward to actually taking my keys and my wallet and my phone out of my pocket and putting them in a drawer and putting on my vestments and just celebrating. Father Nathan celebrates, so I can celebrate. I was like, I'm looking forward to the Divine Liturgy because I get to receive our Lord and I get to hear good readings. I get to hear another priest preach, but I also just get to stand there with nothing else except that worship. And I understand that many people do not feel the Divine Liturgy as that leisure experience. It's like I'm standing and I want to be somewhere else, and there's so many other things I could be doing, and this is boring, whatever. Like that if we form ourselves to even see worship as something that is transcendent, it can become very, very restful.
And that's exactly what you were saying, Mother Gabrielle, at the beginning about like seeking entertainment versus seeking worship. Like we've talked about that before, Father Michael, of just how a lot of people, their struggles with Divine Liturgy or the Mass are because they're coming here expecting entertainment the way that they expect to be entertained at a movie or at a sporting event or something like that. And like, this is not that kind of leisure. It's a different kind of leisure.
Which, yeah, they forget that liturgy means the work of the people.
Yes, it's a work.
And that it's not about us. And that's, it's in that transcendent mode of this time is not about me. It's about the one who created me. And moving outside. And actually what we find is that that's more restorative than we actually think it is. Like we think it's because we forget that we didn't create ourselves. And so God has created us for this way of transcending and entering into him as a way of rest. And that's more restorative than any other way that we could spend our time, because it's connecting us with our true way that we were created.
Great. Should we end in prayer intentions, or do you want to give that correction that you said you had?
I do.
I forgot about
so
that.
It's actually not a correction. It's I was told by, shout out to Anthony Gath, who came to my parish last night. He's from our church in Anaheim, and his dad's a deacon there, Deacon Gregory Gath. But he came last Wednesday and just graduated Ave Maria University, and came on Wednesday night, served at the altar, and he told me that he's a classics major at Ave Maria, and he said that when I was doing one of the 20,000 or however many episodes on the Divine Liturgy there were, that I didn't know what prothesis meant. And neither did Mother. So we were like,
I think
so
I
he
asked
knew,
you, and then you were like, don't
okay.
ask me things that I don't know on the podcast.
Exactly. So he said, that was a while ago, but he said when he heard that, at being a class major, it means literally in Greek. So the prothesis is the preparation rites that we do, that the priest does on the site altar. The Slavonic is proscomedia, but it's the rites that prepare the bread, the loaf of bread, and the bottle of wine, and prepare it so that it can be consecrated during the anaphora and then distributed. And so he says it literally means, prothesis means to put forward. So it's like we may translate that offering or like placing in public. So it's like taking something and presenting it, putting it forward, offering it. So obviously the bread and the wine are being offered by the people to the church, to the altar, to the priest, and then it gets at that point then put forward. And he said it's similar to like a epiclesis. Is it epiclesis or anaphora? I think it may be anaphora, which the whole anaphora that's also offering. That's how we used to translate it. But anaphora, that means kind of if prothesis is putting forward, anaphora is putting up. Like it gets offered by the church, like horizontally, and then it gets offered by the priest and the praying congregation up. So I thought that was pretty cool. So thank you, Anthony, for informing us of that.
Thank you. Okay. Prayer intentions. I would like to ask for prayers for, I think this is coming out June 15th. So I'd like to ask for prayers for Sherry and Ted Rotunda, who are two of our patrons. I hope it's okay that I just shared that information. Sorry if it wasn't Sherry and Ted. But I believe the June 18th is when he's being ordained a deacon. These were the ones on our Zoom meeting, Father Michael, Nice. So prayers for Ted as he's being ordained this weekend, I think, and also for Sherry.
Amen. I think I will be either almost leaving or already in the Holy Land at that time.
You don't know what date you leave?
I have no idea. I'm gone the whole month of June. I don't understand why I need to. It's on my calendar.
You're living in the present moment. That's good.
Much idea for you.
Yeah. So yes, so we'll be there traveling with pilgrims, and I want to make sure that I'm a good chaplain, because this is going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity for so many people, and being the chaplain on a trip like that is a big deal, and it can really help or hinder people's spiritual experiences. I just pray that I'm not a speed bump or a roadblock or a wall to people's encounter with our Lord there. It's intimidating in a bit, because I want to make sure that all the right things are said, and I know all the right things to say. I know all the things that I need to know to say the right things. Anyway, all of that. So
we'll also pray that you're not self-reliant, because God can do all those things without you too.
Oh, exactly. And that's what I mean. Like, pray that I don't get in the way of what the Holy Spirit's doing, in other words. Yeah, and then and pray for just shout out to Sarah Jimenez, who's one of my spiritual daughters, who's coming with, and is going to be awesome to travel with her. So she'll be my measure of how it's going, and give me that feedback.
Awesome. Mother Gabriella?
You said it's coming out June 15th?
I think so, yeah.
Well, I'll ask for prayers for, I'm going on TOB1 for the third time the week following.
She didn't get it the first day.
I know, I'm remedial. I was one of the other sisters. So just prayers for us as we go, that we'll receive whatever it is that God's desiring to give.
Awesome. And continue checking our website for Bridegroom's banquet information, as I announced on the last episode. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Mother Gabriella. This was really good.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We didn't even talk embarrassing things about each other, which is unusual.
Don't ask me to come up with an embarrassing thing, Mother Natalia. You get the consequences.
She did that on the live episode, and then we edited it out.
You're welcome.
Right. Love you, Mother Gabriella and Father Michael. Love you, listeners. Thanks, guys. And Father, can you please give us a blessing?
Sure. Y'all know the spiel about everywhere we are. I forgot about that.
Yeah, we'll do that next time.
They know. The Lord bless you and keep you, cause his face to shine upon you, have mercy on you. May our Lord give you every good thing. May he teach you about what true leisure is. May he facilitate you becoming more and more attracted to that. And attractive, why not? May our Lord allow you to treasure his gift of leisure, to receive it well, to be an example of that to others. And then through that to worship well, grow in holiness, and receive the gift of salvation. May the Lord bless all of you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.